で、インドネシアは、まあ1時間ぐらいだけど、1999年まで軍事国家で、ジョコビドドが首相になってから汚職が減ったんですね。で、麻薬の取り締まりもすごく厳しくてね、オーストラリア人なんかも公主権しちゃってるんですよね。で、中国の漁船の領海侵犯に対してももう爆破しちゃってるんですよね。だからそういう意味ではかなり筋が通ってる。この人と、僕はそういう意味ではフィリピンの、ドゥテルテも似たような性格があって、もうきっちりやっちゃうみたいなね。ドゥテルテの方がもっとちょっと強いかなって、やりすぎてももうそのが殺しちゃうみたいなとこありますけどね。あとはもう一つはバスキチャハプナマっていうアホックの前知事がね、これはめられて、家境でね、これね、干されちゃったけど。まあ、イスラム教ってのはやっぱり、発言の自由とか報道の自由ってやっぱりどこの国もないんですよね。イスラム教国はね。だからそれは、基本的に民主主義とイスラム教ってのは馴染まないものがあるんだ。それは、このインドネシアもそうだね。で、あとは所得格差がね、かなり激しい。で、これはね、インドネシアはね、この時はまだ、インドネシア、一人の GDP のいくらかって書いてないんだな。書いてない。ちょっとわかんない。どっか出てくるけど。書いてない。で、これはだから、ベトナム、前も話したようにベトナムと違って、一人当たりの GDP が正確な所得を示しているかそうじゃなくて、金持ちが独占しているから市民ははるかに貧しいと考えていいと思うんですよね。アフリカなんか軒並み一人当たりの GDP400 ドルとか500ドルだから、これはもう、金持ちなの大統領一族ぐらいでね、あとはみんな貧しい。まあ、インドネシアになるともっと大統領一族だけじゃなくてね、やっぱり財閥があるんですよね。スカルの時はね、共産党、これ後でビデオありますけどね。で、共産党がどんどん力を持ってきちゃったんで、菅春人が、まあ、スカルノを、まあ、追い出したっていうか、まあ、実況を握ったっていう。で、その時にまあ、共産党と合わせて中国に関わりのあった華僑をね、迫害したんですね。だから、政府の要人は華僑系いないんですね。だからインドネシア人と華僑系の中国人と全然行動パターンは違うんですね。これ書いてあるレストランも違うんですね。同じとこ行かない。で、経済界は華僑が 90% 掌握してる。ほとんど華僑が掌握。それからあとは皆さん知らないんですけど、インドネシアって島がね、17,000あるんですよ。で彼らの課題っていうのは図書館のね、コミュニケーションとか、物資輸送とか、それから民主主義をどう浸透させるかとか、大きな課題なんですね。大きな島っていうか大きな島5つあるんですけど、それ以外もこれだけの数なんですね。だから、インドネシアっていうのは、僕、想像だけど、ドローンがね、ものすごい有益なところだと思いますね、ドローン。食料輸送とか、それからあと、まあ、いろいろ物資をね、どれぐらいのドローンかって僕は山発動機で仕事した時ね、人間を乗せないけど、3メーターぐらいのヘリコプター農業用の、ファーティライザー、パーって、農業用のヘリコプター、でかいね。あんなの、結構飛ぶと思うんですよね。ああいうのは、今後、脚光を浴びてくるんじゃないかな。 中国なんかもね、ドローン認めて北京上空でも上海上空でも飛べるようになったけど、インドネシアなんかね、そういう意味では、島に行くっていうのは、非常にそういう意味ではメリットがする。
この間、インドネシアで、ジャカルタから飛行機で1時間の、エドさんのお母さんが生まれてスマランっていうところなんですけど、そこに行った人、現地の人が、なんか、ニュースに出てるって言ってたんですけど、今首都っていうかその行政機能から何から全部ジャカルタに集まっていてもいるんですけど、まあやっぱり渋滞もひどくて、やっぱり地震とかそういうこう、自然災害の影響を結構受けやすい場所だと。
どこら辺なのスマランって？
ジャカルタの話です。
ジャカルタ。
はい。でそこに集中してて、渋滞ひどいしな、もういろいろもう限界に達してきてるんで、その行政の機能だけを、何島って言いましたっけ？ボルネオ島でしたっけ？オランウータンがいたりとか、あそこにもう移しちゃった方がいいんじゃないかっていう、それを検討しますっていう政府の発表が、アナウンスメントがあったと。その今、ジャカルタ一極集中で、インドネシアってその、地域ごとに、その発展というか開発の格差があって、やっぱその、地方とか島を置き去りにされているっていう不平等感があるみたいで、それを少しこう是正するためにも、ジャカルタとかジャワ島だけじゃなくて、他の島にもそういう機能を分散させていくんだっていうふうな考えを今政府の方が発表し始めてるっていうことを言ってました。
アフリカは、首都を変えた国って結構たくさんありますよね。だから、アフリカどこの国も首都にみんな集中したんですよ。人口もね。だから首都変えて、政府変えて、で、商業都市とね、政治都市と分けて。あとはインドネシアってバリ島が有名だけど、シンガポールに近いね、経済特区、バタン島とかビンタン、カリムン島を開発してる。あと5大島嶼っていうのはカリマンタン、スマトラ、ジャワ、スラウェシ、ニューギニアの5つがある。で、今後やっぱりその島嶼内のインフラ開発でね、今後のインドネシアの飛躍の予定になる。というふうに書いてあるけど、アジアの流れかもしれないんだけど、そのジョコビドドもそうだし、ドゥーテルテもそうだけど、やっぱりそろそろこう、なんていうかな、財閥による政治から、その国民を意識したね、金持ちだけがこう、うまくやっていくじゃなくてね、やっぱりここは2億5千万だっけいる中で、やっぱりそういう底上げしていこうっていうのはもうはっきりね、出てきているんで、そういう意味では、この10年間っていうのは、大きく化けていくような。だから、僕はその日本が TPP の中でね、そのインドネシアにどう貢献していくのかっていうのは、やっぱ彼らのやっぱ産業構造をどういうふうにね、一般大衆意識した、そのインフラ開発とね、合わせてね、物理的な、例えば高速鉄道って言えば中国が取ったから日本ががっかりするんじゃなくてね、そんなの中国の方が全然日本より優れてるわけだから、そんなことよりも、例えば鉄道の土地の買収なんだか中国に任せてね、そうじゃなくてやっぱり都市開発そのものをどうするか、都市開発とかね、それから、そういうのもっといわゆるファンダメンタルなそのソフトウェアをね、どうするかっていうのをもうちょっと、さっき言ったような、なんていうかな、背筋をピンと伸ばしたこう、もうちょっとさ、鉄道ってこう張り付くんじゃなくてね、もうちょっとこう、要するに、かっこよくね、 インドネシアに対してアドバイスしてビジネスしていくっていうスタンスがもっと欲しいなっていうのがあるんですよ。それはあなた方のビジネスもそうだけど、やっぱりそういうふうな余裕がないんですよね、日本人って。技術ってね。だから。
ホーチミン行って、地下鉄の工事、日本の ODA でやってて、でもあそこはもう、まさに、フェリカで、日本のスイカで JR の仕組みを入れてみたいな、そこに日本政府の JICA も JR も国交省も、そこを入り口にして広げていくんだっていう、そういう意気込みでやってるんですよね。そんなさなか、ホーチミンメトロの1号線、遅れてるんですけど、政府側のプロジェクトマネジメントユニットから、そこのトップがですね、去年、一昨年、新しい人が変わって、フランスの会社にずっといた、全然パブリックの経験のない人がポンと入ってきて、もうなんか全部ビジネスライフに、なんで日本のラインでフェイカーを使わなきゃいけないんだと。他のラインは、そのヨーロッパ方式で、バスも他の公共交通も全部マイフェアタイプ A じゃないと。ヨーロッパ方式じゃなんで日本だけそれでやらなきゃいけないの。今更だけど、それに合わせてできないからもう一回考え直せっていう。それで日本がもう、本当にざわついちゃってて、どうやってそれを眺めるか。ソニーから、JICA から JR から全部集まって、国交省
まあ、そういうところまで来ちゃうともう無理でしょう。
もういいように、足元見られて、揺さぶられて。
まあ、そうじゃなくて、やっぱりその根回しとかさ、交渉力ないから、例えばクアンさんみたいな会社がね、フェアっていうか、50-50でインボルブメントしてればね、状況変わると思うんですけど、日本の、コンソーシアムだったらできないですよね。
そうですね。それを聞いた時の、当事者と、バスの方は俺ら一緒にやってるので、当事者っちゃ当事者なんですけど、カンさんはどうせそんなこと言ったって、今から全部設計変更したら、フェイクが高いとか、日本の技術が高いって言って、それ以上に高くつくんだから、それは揺さぶってきてるだけで、こんだけお金かかりますけど、それでもいいんですかみたいな話で並べておけば、向こうも引き下がるはずだと。あんまり、こっちが躍起になって、説明しだすと、やめだぞみたいなことを言ってて。
ベトナム人をさ、日本人が50-50で評価してればね、問題は解決するんだと思うんですけど、日本人はベトナム人をやっぱり下に見てるんで、僕はだから、そのベトナム人がフランス長かったらね、カチンと来るかもしれませんよね。だから、もしそうだとすれば、もうベトナム人、こっち側にベトナム人と50-50で組んでね、日本のプロジェクトじゃないようにするしか方法はないんですよ。じゃないとやっぱり彼らいきなりどっかで、ね、前書いた本、そういうシナリオになってるけど。
そうだ。そうですね。高速道路の小説書かれてたじゃないですか。あっちはもっと状況が進んでて、悪い方向に進んでて。あれが最初取った高速道路の次のダナンのやつが2番目で、3番目がホーチミンのもう1個の区間、ホーチミンのナンバー2の高速道路なんですけど、まさに RFID がベトナムで正式に標準だっていう、扱いを法的にもされるようになって、
俺の本のシナリオ通りになってる。
そうなんですよ。MOT から JICA に、ベトナムの標準は残念ながら日本方式じゃなくて、RFID 方式に。
僕の本では、ヨーロッパのさ、ベルギーのブラッセルで、そういう話になった。
これについては、日本の ODA とはいえ、その中の技術はオープンにしてくださいと。日本の技術で縛らないでください。つまりその RFID も受け入れて、どっちが本当にいいかをちゃんと評価してくれと。で、 技術にしがみついてる日本、JICA は、結局、もしそういう条件だったら、ETC も、交通管制の ITS も、全部のパッケージ、上物のパッケージは全部、その返借款、ローンは、もう実施いたしませんと。だから、もうプロジェクト自体をなくします。それで結構ならどうぞっていう返答を正式に交通運輸省にしてしまって。で、昨日、おととい聞いたら、それを受けた運輸交通省は、その下の、その道路事業者に、まあそういうことだから、関係者も入札をして、一回それ一次審査も終わってるんですけど、そういう人たちにどう説明、言い訳するか考えろって話にきっとなるだろうと。で、いやいや、もしかして、日本側がそこまで強く言ってくるんだったら、ベトナムも折れて、まあ、情報案を出してくる可能性はないんですか？
ノーノーノーノー、チャイナですよ。ノーノーノー。ノーノーノー、チャイナですよ。チャイナですよ。だって、最大のさ、貿易取引相手国ですから。ベトナムはね。だから、で中国はやっぱりその地下鉄にしても高速道路にしても技術は日本より進んでるし、別についでにそれやれよみたいな彼らはさ、いい加減にしたってやってくれるからね。それは別に RFID なんてさ、別に日本にこだわる必要ないですよ。ね？それはやっぱり安易ですよ。
いや、まさかそこまで本当になるとは、まあ思ってなかったけど、本当にそうなるもんなんだって。
いや、だから彼らはやっぱりさ、そのベトナムに関わってる人はベトナムしか見てないんでね。中国の市場見てればね、もうはっきり中国ですよ。今の、彼らの今の、バスの運行計画とかね、そんなこと調べてみればすぐわかるけど。これは彼ら出来合いのものを持ってきてさ、日本はできてないものと、向こうはできてんだから、このまま入れますよって。料金3分の1でいいですよって言ってくるに決まってるよ。RFID なんていっぱい入ってんだから、中国ね。中国は料金なんか多少いい加減でもいいんだから。アメリカ一番進んでるけどね、RFID は。ね。中国は、いや、そんな言うんだったらアメリカと組んでやって、プロポーズしますよと言って聞かないよ。ね。日本はじゃあ組んでプロポーズできますかって言ったら、どこと組んでいいかわからない。行ったこともない。
それやってるのも、日本でやってるのも三菱重工なんですけど、三菱重工こそ、結構、自前主義で、なんで俺たちがアメリカの技術を、とかアメリカの会社と動かなきゃいけないんだって。
三菱重工なんて実際 RFID のさ、バスに対して導入する実績もあるへん。アメリカなんかもそんなの、10年前からやってる。ね？だからそれはさ、何がさ、精度悪いとこどうやってカバーしてんのかさ、そういうのは彼らのはるかに技術っていうか、いわゆる、馴染んでる。ね？一般大衆が納得してる。そういうソフトウェア部分全部しがらみで彼ら持ってんだからさ、アメリカの会社と提携するべきですよ。そんなの勝てるわけないんだよ。中国はどっちかっていうと、ハードウェアはものすごい安いコストである。で、ソフトウェアは中国持ってないから、それ大衆はどうでもいいや、みたいな。アメリカは大衆うるさいから。アメリカに持ってる、ロサンゼルスか、ニューヨークかね、どっちかのソフトを持ってきて、ソフトっていうか、導入したマニュアルも含めて。それをその持ってくればそのまま入るわけですよね。で、彼らに対して、彼らとやっぱりそのジョイント組んでね、やればいいんですよ。それが僕の方の答えで。
そうか、そう、ちょっと今繋がったんですけど、ITD から、その話は日本のコンサルからの最新情報を聞いて、ITD からは、高速道路を、ODA とか、ADB とかワールドバンクじゃなくて、BOT でやると、いわゆる PPP でやるっていう決定がまたされたと。で、インベスターが必要なので、どうするか相談したいっていうメールが来たんですけど、もしかしたらそれは、日本の ODA がなくなるみたいな動きと合わせて。
そうですよ。そうですよ。だから、僕の方持ってってさ、関係者に配ったらいいんですよ。まさしく今ホットな、そのものですよ。本あげるから持ってったら。
びっくりです。
そのままですよ、これ。全く同じシナリオだ。 こうなりますよ、と。
高速道路だけじゃなくて、場合によってはちょっとメトロももう少しこじれるかもしれない。
そうですよ。だから僕の、シナリオが正しいんですよ。あれベトナム語で翻訳されたらベトナム人はもうすぐそうしようって。しますよ。ね。持ってったらあなた、高速道路だ。あげるからさ。
大変みたいな、首相官邸から電話が三菱重工にかかってくるそうで。
三菱重工って僕はもうその中で何度も考えたけど、不可能ですよ。じゃあそれをまたさ、マニュアルから何からさ、作るのって。でもアメリカみたいに10年以上経験してるね。RFID っていうのは精度そんな高くないから、10年以上経験してるところのノウハウで要するに、じゃあ 5% 読み取れなかったらどうしてるのかって彼ら完璧な、なんていうか、マニュアル持ってるわけですよね。それをどういうふうにするかっていうのは、運用会社と日本が提携するしかないんですよ。ね。それはだからやっぱり、彼らを巻き込んでやるべきなんですよ。当たり前ですよ。僕はこういうリベラルアーツ言ってるのはもうちょっとさ、こう一歩退いて、もっとさ、背筋ピンと伸ばしてもじっくり考えろと、技術って言うなと思うよ。ね。何でもかんでもお前儲ければいいって言わないと。日本人のいいところっていうのは、相手の国のことを考えて、自分の心を殺して相手のために尽くすっていうのが、もともと日本のね、精神だったわけですから。そういうことを今一度ね、考え直しなさいというのが僕の、前の回答ね。Okay, let's try to read the sentences about in English of Indonesia. On October 20th, 2014, Joko Widodo, often referred to as Jokowi, was inaugurated as the 7th president of Indonesia. He is the 5th democratic president and only the second one directly elected by Indonesians. As is often the case with young democracies, the 2014 presidential election was accompanied by various returns to authoritarian rhetoric and practices by some political stakeholders, and the nation had to be reinvented. As idea of Indonesia has to be brought to life, and imagined community needed to be developed. Sukarno and Suharto both followed their oftentimes highly disputable respective ways that nevertheless left a heavy imprint on Indonesia's political culture. The problems Indonesia has faced over the past couple of years in terms of democracy development are to be expected for a country of diverse peoples who, from one moment to the next, were asked to develop a unitary national consciousness after the nation proclaimed independence in 1945. What Indonesia holds is more of a guided democracy. This is a political system in place in Indonesia from 1957 until the new order began in 1966. It was the brainchild of President Sukarno and was an attempt to bring about political stability. While Joko Widodo's government infused by corruption and nepotism, considering the nation's most eventful history, his victory as a political newcomer with a democratic idea of Indonesia's future gives the country its next chance for an attempt at democracy. Sukarno believed the Western-style democracy was inappropriate for Indonesia's situation. Instead, he sought a system based on the traditional village system of discussion and consensus, which occurred under the guidance of village elders. Sukarno proposed a threefold blend of nationalism. This was intended to appease the three main factions in Indonesian politics: the army, Islamic groups, and the communists. With the support of the military, he proclaimed in February 1957 guided democracy and proposed a cabinet representing all political parties of importance. Since then, there was no Western-style parliamentary democracy in Indonesia until the 1999 election of the Reformasi era. Okay? After the resignation of authoritarian President Suharto, there was a more open and liberal political social environment ending the 3 decades of the New Order period. Issues over this period have included the push for stronger democracy and civilian rule, elements of the military trying to retain their influence, a growing Islamism in politics and society, and demands for greater regional autonomy. The process of reformasi in Indonesia has resulted in a greater degree of freedom of speech, in contrast to the pervasive censorship under the new order. The current president is Joko Widodo, the first who is not from a family of the establishment. Okay? The next video. The complexity of government in Indonesia. This is 2016 video. In this video, recorded on the sidelines of the Crawford Australian Leadership Forum, Professor Hal Hill discusses the Jokowi presidency, Indonesia's foreign policy, and the complexity of government in decentralizing archipelagic nation state with leading Indonesian public policy expert Dewi Fortuna Anwar. Okay? で、ジョコ・ウィドドが大統領にまとめですと、第1期が3分の2過ぎましたけど、政治は安定してきているけれども、資源の価格が落ち込んで、リソースプライスは今落ちてるんで、経済良くない。で、去年になって資源の価格が大幅に回復してきている。このビデオを撮ったときは、まだ良くない。政治においては地方分権を進めている。また政府は海洋の管理にも力を入れている。島嶼間の連絡、港の建設、航空便の開設を通じて資源の有効な管理できるように考えている。もちろん安全保障も考慮している。単語はパチ。完全。あんまり聞かないね。ディスマントル。これはしょっちゅう使うね。ミニストリー。これもしょっちゅう出ますね。ウェザー。これはしょっちゅう出ますね。リンギスティック。これも出ますね。ナイスティーズ。あんまり使わないね。ナイスティーズ。タグライン。これもあんまり使わない。ノンアラインド。これよく使いますね。バイアンドラージ。これしょっちゅう出ますね。プロビジョナル。これ使いますね。インピード。これも使います。ディター。使いますね。コントラディクト。これもよく使いますね。Okay, so let's going to have a look for this video. Maybe this one.
Hello, I'm Hal Hill from the Australian National University, and we're on the sidelines of the Crawford Australian Leadership Forum, and it's my very great privilege to... Hello, I'm Hal Hill from the Australian National University, and we're on the sidelines of the Crawford Australian Leadership Forum, and it's my very great privilege to introduce a most distinguished Indonesian policymaker and academic, Dr. Dewi Fortuna Anwar. Dr. Dewi needs no introduction, but let me just say she is Indonesia's leading foreign policy expert, and she has a remarkable breadth of knowledge of policy, both as an insider and an outsider. Dewi, welcome to the forum, and welcome again to Canberra.
She is very good speaker.
She is.
I didn't check her, but she might be minister experience, maybe, might be. He has heavily involved in the government.
Let me raise some questions with you, very broad in scope. First of all, President Joko Widodo, Jokowi, is now about 1/3 of the way through his first term, and most likely he'll have a second term. How would you say he's travelling about 1/3 of the way through his term?
Well, thank you very much, Hal. And it's always a pleasure to be back here in Canberra and meeting so many friends. And I'm really enjoying this Crawford Australian Leadership Forum.
Usually Indonesian people speak, they cannot speak like her. Okay? Local accent. But she's a very fluent speaker.
President Joko Widodo and Vice President Mr. Salas, the first year of the presidency was a bit patchy. As you know, usually it is the case when you form a new administration. But a lot of the bureaucratic dismantling and restructuring of ministries have now been finalized. So the cabinet is up and running. The president is very much in charge of the cabinet. Remember the first 2 years there was some difficulty of coordination with strong personalities in the cabinet, and that is now improving quite significantly with the president very much in a strong leadership position. And importantly, the government has received increasing support from Parliament. When President Joko Widodo started the presidency, the coalition party supporting the government only had about 43% seats in Parliament. Now, the overwhelming majority of parties in Parliament, those in the opposition, except Gerindra, have declared themselves to be supporters of the government. So, in terms of pushing forth legislation in Parliament and managing the cabinet, the government is doing quite well. Well, of course, we have difficulties with the economy. Indonesia has weathered the financial crisis of 2008 relatively well. The structural reforms that have been put in place after the Asian financial crisis.
So what she's talking about, this is an interview 2016, right? So Joko Widodo, he's just very heavily supported by Parliament, and also he managed economy in Indonesia. So she's just talking about resources. Commodity market is slugging, but this year, last year, 2017, recovered. So it means doing well. Okay.
Have borne fruit, so Indonesia has become much stronger in terms of the financial institutions. But of course, we continue to suffer the effects both of the financial crisis and now the downturn in commodity prices. Our revenues, of course, decline because Indonesia is still very much dependent on commodity exports, and tax collection has fallen below target. So the government budget is not as good as it wanted, as it was projected. In fact, only the first few months of the 2016 fiscal year, we only have to cut some 50 trillion the national budget, and probably if the tax amnesty doesn't really bring in the promised fresh money from overseas, the the budget will probably go down even further. So the politics is good. Economy, we are all suffering like the rest of the world. Yeah.
And in some ways, it's a bit like Australia. Australia's also been through this massive commodity boom, and the political economy narrative in Australia hasn't yet really adjusted to the fact that we haven't got a commodity boom anymore. And I guess the same sort of challenge is operating in Indonesia.
Yeah, but on the other hand, necessity makes good policy, and precisely because we are in the middle of this, systemic challenges, global, financial, and commodity challenges. There is, and we are competing with the rest of the world. There is now a keener recognition and also commitment to carry out various fundamental reforms in terms of improve Indonesia's economic competitiveness and the ease of doing business. There's a very ambitious target, for example, of improving the ease of doing business from the 109 rank now to 40 by next year. We'll see what happens, but everyone is on this very.
She said 190 to 40 means business easiness.
Agenda.
You mean 2017?
Supervising, very hands-on.
Yes, and looking outward, where is Indonesia going? Whereas President Yudhoyono had a very strong interest in regional and global affairs, I guess it's fair to say that President Jokowi initially didn't really have the same sort of interest, but inevitably Indonesia is going to get pulled into a lot of regional and global issues, ASEAN, for example, and Indonesia and China, and Indonesia and the Middle East. So where would you say Indonesian foreign policy is going at the moment?
There is a very strong emphasis on economic diplomacy under President Jokowi Widodo. I mean, as President Jokowi came to power, there is a strong emphasis that Indonesia doesn't just want to carry out foreign policy for the sake of diplomatic niceties or international reputation, put it that way, or prestige. That foreign policy has to bear concrete benefits for improving people's welfare. So the tagline is not 1 million friends, 0 enemies, but rather people-oriented foreign policy with modest targets. So the stress is more on looking at key bilateral relations where Indonesia could get direct benefits for investment markets and so on and so forth. But as you pointed out, Indonesia is a big regional player. It is the world's largest Muslim majority country. It is a prominent leader in the non-aligned movement in the developing world. It is a member of the G20. It is expected to play a regional role within ASEAN. It is not something that Indonesia.
Oh, by the way, Indonesia is a G20 member? She said, right?
Expected to play a regional role within ASEAN. It is not something that Indonesia can actually ignore. And in fact, Indonesia has not ignored it. The system is already in place where both the economic focus in foreign policy as well as the more foreign policy proper, diplomatic, security orientation foreign policy can actually be undertaken by Indonesia simultaneously. So Indonesia has continued to be actively engaged both at the regional and multilateral level.
The other point which is always worth remembering in the case of Indonesia is it is the world's largest archipelagic nation state with, depending on the sea level, 13 or more thousand islands. And as we know, Indonesia implemented what's often called the so-called Big Bang decentralization in 2001, accompanying the democracy. And I guess it's still work in progress, that decentralization, but by and large it's working. What would you say are the major challenges now in implementing regional autonomy vis-a-vis national government and local government?
So regional autonomy is supposed to both serve political security objectives as well as welfare objectives. The political security objective is that by decentralizing power, giving more power to the people at the local level, they would have a greater sense of ownership of being part of Indonesia. No reason for them to demand independence, for example, when they do as well and even better, under Indonesia. So sense of belonging, ownership to the central government. That's the political security objective. But at the same time, there's a real delivery objective to improve governance, to improve the service delivery, to allow various regions to develop according to their needs and unique characters. Now, the results of regional autonomy started in 2000.
Of course. So, 250 million population beforehand, they just only manage major city like Jakarta or maybe Bali or a couple of cities. And the other cities, they cannot take care of those cities, right? But now is they try to decentralize power to encourage them to develop with investment, right? So what she's talking about. Of course, beforehand, they can do that. Centralized, decentralized, but they don't have allow them to do that. Decentralization, right?
2001 has been rather patchy. Some have done well. Some regions have delivered really best practices and they've improved their welfare and governance. But others have not done so. Some have simply multiplied the numbers of bureaucracies and the splintering up of regional governments, with the end result that most of the government spending have been spent on paying the government bureaucrats rather than on improving service delivery. So this is something that we are very concerned about, and there is now a real desire, already starting under SBY, to improve the decentralization process. So the decentralization law has been revised a number of times, and the last one is in 2014. So the provincial government is now being given a greater supervisory role, and the central government is also now more engaged in ensuring that the bylaws passed by regional governments do not impede economic development, do not deter investors, and at the same time do not contradict higher laws, for example, on tourism or religious tolerance and so on. And secondly, you mentioned about Indonesia being an archipelagic state. We've always talked about Indonesia's archipelagic principles, but in reality, in practice, the focus has always been on land development. Now, one of the priorities of digital administration is, of course, the maritime areas. There's the Indonesia, Pak Jokowi talked about Indonesia as becoming a global maritime fulcrum. So the development and safeguarding of the maritime domain is a key priority, and that covers all areas. So it goes improving connectivity, inter-island shippings and the building ports and airlines connectivity, but particularly the maritime connectivity, managing maritime resources, and then improving maritime security and defense, and then maritime diplomacy. A lot of our maritime borders are not finalized yet, delineation of boundaries, for example. And fifthly, maritime culture. We talk about maritime identity, but most Indonesians are afraid of waters. So we have lost our seafaring traditions. So these are some of the priorities that the government is trying to do.
Okay, she speaks very fast, but she might be the core member of current government, advisor for Joko Widodo. She knows about Joko Widodo's foreign policy, and first of all, they try to decentralize, delegate responsibility for the local city, encourage investment, and second, also this country is a maritime country. Maritime, right? So they need to consider for the ratings of investment for the kind of insurer of 17,000 islands, right? So how to manage those islands.
I have a question on the policy have mentioned explained in the interview for disintegration and decentralizing some also looking from central to the local. as we saw earlier part in Japanese, there are two major actors in Indonesian society. One is local Indonesian and also ethnic Chinese Indonesian. And ethnic Chinese is dominating economy. So this means the government initiative only, even with some other ones to make some investment, may not help the decentralizing to go well, because so ethnic, there must be ethnic Chinese, their influence even in the regional, the local area, maybe sometimes in real estate, and sometimes some right to do business, or they are doing some business in the local area. So if in order for this investment or local development to go well, maybe government initiative have to shake hands, to close hands to some business influence, mainly by ethnic Chinese group. So I mean, in the decentralizing policy, how should the relationship between the government authority and
always Chinese Indonesia very close relationship with government people. Otherwise, they cannot survive in that country in the past, right? And they are so many people prosecuted and killed. And in many cases, they escaped to Singapore. So even anytime they just skeptical for the local Indonesian people. So Chinese is willing to building up a strong trust relationship all over Indonesia. So I believe this is the investment itself. Chinese is very concerned for the investment monetary balance. They got profit, they're going to decide investment. And just I told you before, 90% of economy is occupied by Chinese Indonesia. So Indonesian government need to get help from them. So doing well, I believe. For Chinese side, always compromise to support Indonesian bureaucratic, decision making. So I think no problem. It's the Indonesian government recently recognized those overseas Chinese don't have a communist ideology, so they don't clamp down on those people. So I think doing well.
Okay, the second question is there are the gap between rich and poor, which has been widening, getting wider and wider in nation.
You mean inequality?
Inequality
okay.
between rich and poor, partially because of its Muslim society. But this decentralizing policy makes some this I don't know if this policy will turn out to be some benefit for decrease the gap between rich and poor.
Oh, okay. Consider for how to handle poverty is another issue. And of course, he just recognized it's currently all over Asia. Is most concerned is corruption. Corruption is caused more heavier accelerate poverty because corrupted, bureaucratic politician got rich in the past. But Joko Widodo, he very much keen to more fair and clean politics. So it means this is the first step he cleared. But still they have rich people and poor people, they have gap is going. Next step what he's going to consider for them. She didn't tell about that, but consider about tax. That kind of tax system. Sort of is in corporate tax, also personal tax, and try to consider for the leverage of fair, asset distribution. This is here going to take another step. And just they have 17,000 islands. It's very difficult, to try to get equality for those people. It takes time. But Islam is different from democracy. Islamic people education is very strict, and training is very harsh. So Islamic family is grandfather and father and son and grandchildren. They get together very well coordinated each other. This is Islamic education. So at this meaning, they try to implement Islamic policy. I think they're going to influence all over the Indonesia. It does well, going well. But they need to consider for strongly enforce Islamic religion, also considering balancing democracy. It's a little bit difficult how to balance because Islam is they that hate freedom of speech. So sort of discrepancy Islamic and Islam and democracy. So she's concerned that she needs to consider for balance among Islam and democracy. But Islam religion is very good to control poverty, frustration. Okay, so Islam teach them patience. But also this country have some feeling for the fear of the terrorists, of course, because Islam is terrorist people is Sunni terrorists is some organization in Indonesia they have. So also they care about those kind of organizations will not growing in the power in this country. So poverty is not easy to clear the issue. 10 years, 1 decade, 2 decades, it takes time. But first step is she just clear corruption. In Africa, just every country they corrupted, like Zimbabwe or Zuma, South Africa. People, every people is poverty. Only president, family, and also the few. Indonesia is more wider people, is the rich people. Not only president, but also some establishment people rich. But if to eliminate corruption, those people get more money like before, right? So they losing opportunity to get money, like real estate. Or because real estate means, okay, government will going to give the opportunity for the real estate lending or sales, or government-owned real estate, so forth. And these people, establishment people, try to handle those real estate. Sort of things will not go in like before. So more equally to distribute resources. Right?
I think the combination of the Muslim and democracy is the same case.
Yeah, this is very difficult. This is most difficult rather than poverty, how to improve poverty.
The Bangladesh is also same day. It's not 100%, but they have the free general election.
Same problem.
but same problem. And
same problem.
maybe if they don't have democracy, is not the one which is called corruption. They may not call some money transaction as corruption, but once they are put in democratic system,
Oh, by the way, Bangladesh, they don't have corruption. Do they?
Yes.
Do they?
They're calling transparent corruption. Everyone knows there's corruption, and everyone knows how.
You're talking about the government?
The government, yes.
Really?
All state-owned company has never made any profit.
You mean nepotism?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, yeah, I had this situation from the local person, but not Muslim. They're mainly caused by their relationship in the Muslim family, Muslim system, and all state-owned company intends to invite the family of the top person.
Okay, might be. Okay. So let's go to lunch. And I think we had better do some more of the coming back lunch. Or Indonesia, some more. Okay? Okay, let's start. We're going to watch next video. This is title. This title is Theft and Corruption Among Indonesians. With 60,000 millionaires. Oh, there are 60,000 millionaires in Indonesia. The cash is splashing around Indonesia. Yet recently, their playground has been invaded by two major scandals that reveal the full extent of the country's corruption. で、次は要約ですね。高級ブティックの話が出てきます。それで、1000ドルから1万ドルのドレスを作っているオーナーが出てきます。その中に、マリンダ・ディという女性がいたんですけど、彼女はシティバンクの顧客マネージャーであったんですけども、300万ドルの顧客の預金をですね、不正に利用した。まあ、それだけ彼女自身が力を持ってたっていうことと、まあ、銀行そのものの管理がずさんだった。ですね。で、次は二つ話があって、二つ目は、5000ドルの金をですね、これ。5000ドルを金貸しから借りた。シティバンクに呼び出されて、そこで死んでしまったって。殺しちゃったんですよね、金貸しの用心棒が。で、墓を掘り起こして分かったのだが、明らかに打撲の跡がいくつもあったっていうこと。二つの話ですね。正反対のもの。この報告書は正反対のものが二つに分かれたってことは、殺人を隠蔽したか、いや、そうじゃないよって、そういう意味ですね。いや、実際に殺人したんでしょうね、きっと。いや、まあ、これ録音してるからあんまり言えないけど。どうですかね。theft 窃盗ね。theft booth conspicuously high rolling conspicuously は使うでしょ。theft はしょっちゅう出るし。high rolling はあんまり使わないね。socialities これもあんまり使わない。fabulous これは時々使う。showy これも使わない。infamous しょっちゅう出ます。infamous これ悪名が高いって意味で、なかなか意味と単語とイメージ違いますけど、infamous 高ウェイこれも使わない。perspective これはしょっちゅう出ますね。extraordinary 使います。taint 使います。pop in あんま使わない。clientele これも使わない。parley これも使わない。mischief これは使います。gossip をもちろん使う。 mesmerized。mesmerized。これは使わない。transfixed。transfixed。使わない。lavish 使います。flamboyant 使います。quimpy 使います。big time。あんまり使わない。controversy しょっちゅう出ます。rub shoulders with これもあんまり使わない。catwalk これは時々出てきますね。gaping gaping あんまり使わない。ooze 使います。socialite あんまり使わない。pitfall しょっちゅう使います。permit しょっちゅう使います。infiltrate しょっちゅう使います。head turning どうかな。set tongues wagging あんまり聞いたことない。vulgar あんまり、まあ、時々 budge これもあんまり使わない。stunning しょっちゅう使います。walk of shame あんまり使わない。sovereign しょっちゅう使います。clearing house 使います。muscle この意味ではあんまり使わない。muscle 筋肉はよく使う。temperamental 使います。usher 普通はアシャインで、新しい時代が到来するで使います。contest wind up touch a low nerve あんまり使わないな。bumper あんまり使わない。brandishing 使うかなどうかな。exhumation 使わないね。exhumation 初めて。pathologist 時々ですね。bruise 使います。stroke 使います。cover up 使います。riding road 使います。これ合ってんのかなアンダー、これ違うね、スペルが。アンダー、ベリー。シッツ。アンダーベリー。アンダーベリー。弱点ね。F が余計。アンダーベリー。F が余計。intimidate。アンダーベリー。アンダーベリー。あんまり使わない。アクセント。アンダーベリー。あんまり使わない。それから、intimidate しょっちゅう使います。stag 使います。allay 使います。surely 使います。これ、surely はイメージを損ねるじゃなくて違う意味で使うような気がするんですけどね。価値を減じる。名声の価値を汚す。サリー。修理じゃない。サリー。ペドリン。インフラスあんま使わない。misappropriate。よく使います。misappropriate。take a toll in。被害を与える犠牲を。take a toll in。これはあんま使わないね。OK。それで、これで、まあ、いっぱい、これ彼女がシーバンクマネージャー、マリンダ D 使い込んだ。で、これ結構長いんですね。で、インドネシアの6万人がミリオネアっていうのね。
ホームページ、自分で作ってみませんか？
さっきやったの。OK、let's have a look. 25分。
It's amazing. It's a lively country.
It's buzzing with a renewed sense of wealth and prosperity. Many of the country's 60,000 millionaires live here and do business here. Even being a billionaire is a boom industry. They've doubled in number to 20 in just 2 years. Of course, being conspicuously wealthy in crowded and jammed Jakarta has its challenges, and so the super rich have to take their supercars to private racetracks to play. While a growing army of fashionistas
Indonesia, whenever going to Indonesia to meet with Indonesian people, they have, he said, 60,000 millionaires. Actually, the meeting with Japanese people meeting with Indonesian people, many cases they are very rich. Okay, whenever I'm going to Indonesia or joining ASEAN people, everybody they have very rich and just like a car, Ferrari or 2 or 3 cars they have, and also they have $100 million asset they have, or $200 million asset. Many people
can head to one of the city's private fashion shows for their expensive and very exclusive designer wear.
People think high-rolling socialites in Jakarta should have fancy cars, nice apartments, fabulous clothes, plastic surgery.
For many of Indonesia's showy, moneyed elite, it's see and be seen, and a culture of get rich any way you can.
Welcome.
Andre Frankie is one of Indonesia's leading designers of the kebaya, a traditional Javanese blouse. He's couturier to the rich and powerful, to the famous and infamous alike. From his studio tucked away in Jakarta's southern suburbs, he's gained a unique perspective on the extraordinary and sometimes tainted lives of Jakarta's well-to-do.
Sangat-sangat fantastic, like a sport car, like Ferrari, Maserati, and then Lamborghini. Sometimes dia bisa sewa untuk private jet untuk pergi ke luar negeri, seperti itu.
One of Andre's customers, Ade, has popped in for a fitting.
You also have a nice dress.
I like all his design. In my opinion, he made Indonesian traditional dress very beautiful. This is the real one.
Ade is typical of Andre Frankie's clientele.
The cutting.
She's one of a loyal group of big spending women with a passion for fashion.
We going to the movies together, dinner, see fashion show, and also chat to Bali, traveling in Indonesia, and but it's not really slim.
There's plenty of fun, mischief, and gossip. And right now, there's no end of scandal. Jakarta is transfixed by 2 major criminal dramas exposing the dark side of high finance Indonesia style. And the central characters happen to feature as models in a lavish publication promoting Andre Frankie's flamboyant designs. Are these real diamonds?
Yeah, real diamonds.
Really? Nothing fake?
Nothing.
This is Melinda D, a social queen bee and a big-time banker.
This is also Melinda D.
She might normally be here in Andre's studio being fitted for a spectacular garment, only she's in jail right now, awaiting trial. More on Melinda D later. But first, let's go straight to the top.
Miranda Gultom. Yeah.
Miranda Gultom was one of Indonesia's most influential figures, a deputy governor at the country's central bank, Bank Indonesia.
It's very skeptical. How come deputy bank manager? or governor, why she got lots of money to make a dress here. Right? He said one dress is $1,000 to $10,000. It's impossible what this kind of position she is.
Brilliant blue. Brilliant
Right?
lady, Miranda. She's very nice lady also, but quite strong and protective.
Are you surprised that she's in controversy?
Yeah.
Well, fashion show, of course, is a
She's-
side work, you know, but my main work is
So tied
more
to here.
on economics issues.
Okay,
But my
it's
main
tied
work
to here.
is more on
Deputy
economic
governor
issues.
of bank, right?
She's as well connected as she is well dressed, rubbing shoulders with the children of former President Suharto. They sponsored this recent Andre Frankie fashion show. But these days, Miranda Galton doesn't spend as much time as she'd like by the catwalk. She's starring as a witness in the corruption court in a case focusing on how she rose so high in the central bank. In 2004, Miranda Galton was nominated by the then President Megawati Sukarno Putri to be Deputy Governor of Bank Indonesia. Prosecutors say her election win was assured when someone paid politicians from Megawati's party and their allies $2.8 million in travellers' checks to vote for her.
Kalau boleh, saya berteriak. Memang kasus ini bukan kasus Miranda Galton.
Yang tanya penasihat hukum itu.
Penasihat hukum, saya tidak tahu ada travel check.
4 politicians are already in jail for accepting the bribes.
Well, I have sympathy with them because it's not clear where the money comes from. And what
Oh, you said you're right. This is 2016. Oh, still corrupted, right? You're right.
money for? Is it because they are electing me, or is it for election, which is it was the year of election? It's not improving yet.
No one's been charged with paying the bribes. In fact, it's one of the gaping holes in the case. For her part, Miranda continues to insist she knows nothing.
Why should I bribe them? Logically, I shouldn't bribe them, right? Because automatically they're already supported me.
Isn't it
And
just
it-
part of the system, the way things work?
No, I don't think so. I never give money. I never give money for anything.
As for Miranda's woes, in socialite circles, they're viewed simply as one of the pitfalls of power and politics.
Maybe that's the Indonesian political,
The way things work.
yeah, we don't know the white or gray or black, that's political.
Always in the shadows.
Yes.
If shadowy affairs permeate Indonesia's top financial authority, it won't be a surprise to hear they've infiltrated the whole banking system.
Ibu Melinda D.
And that brings us back to Melinda D. Melinda D was a star at one of Andre's high society fashion parades. For 22 years, she worked for the US-based financial giant Citibank, rising to become a senior customer relations manager.
Is Melinda like this?
Andre's dresses sell for between $1,000 and $10,000 apiece. Melinda D owned 20 of them.
You made this for Melinda?
Yeah?
Wow. Pink's her favourite colour, I
Yeah, pink. Favorite color. Melinda dia adalah salah satu dari klien kita. They come here with a bodyguard and with Hermes bag and then with the nice diamond and all of the things with the nice watch.
When Melinda When the D burst onto the scene, she quickly had heads turning and tongues wagging.
3 years ago, with very nice style, we call Barbie. You know Barbie? Like a doll, because everything is very perfect, not like me. This is perfect, everything perfect. That's we call Barbie.
Melinda D cukup eksis di high-end society. Apalagi dia mempunyai dress. Everybody know her.
Maybe this is no voice. Why? Oh, 5 actually. Oh, right. Wow. しいな。
Citibank wouldn't be interviewed for this program.
スピーカーおかしい。
Yeah, the Citibank not give the sufficient answer to us about this.
Mereka nggak penting dananya dari mana, yang penting ada simpanan di banknya.
Citibank wouldn't be interviewed for this program. When the central bank investigated, it found widespread problems not just at Citibank, but across Indonesia's private banking sector. It banned Citibank from recruiting new high rollers for a year, and it imposed tough new rules on the whole industry. But Citibank is in even deeper trouble. While it was losing millions at the top end and not even noticing, at the bottom end, its heavy-handed recovery of debt has brought a dark cloud over the bank and the whole banking system. It's the end of 40 days of mourning for Essie Rinaldi and her two daughters, Chitra and Grace. They're visiting the grave of their loving husband and father, Erzan Okta.
Saya udah benar-benar nggak bisa bayangin nanti kenapa, gimana. Agar anaknya, dia sangat protektif anaknya. Biarlah anaknya di rumah daripada pergi-pergi. Yang dibilang nggak aman.
Before he died, Erzan Okta had accrued a credit card debt of $5,000. 6 debt collectors working on contract for Citibank showed up at the family home.
Takut mereka kan cuma punya otot ya. Mereka nggak punya brandnya, nggak ada isinya. Jadi kan kita takut, tahu-tahu nanti kalau misalnya dia blunder-blunder, taunya anak kita disandra, diapain kan gitu kan. Saya takutnya kayak gitu.
The next day, Erzan Okta went to his Citibank branch. He was ushered into a debt collection counselling room called the Clio Room. What happened inside is hotly contested, but what's certain is that Erzan Okta wound up dead on the floor.
Itu bukan disambar geledek lagi. Melayang. Kita udah bulat-bulatan, udah 3 tuh. Di tempat tidur. Papa. Itu yang paling gede itu. Grace. Papa aku jadiin kita anak yatim katanya. Kata dia. Dari anak kita anak yatim.
Erzan Okta's death touched a raw nerve with the public constantly bombarded by banks pushing credit.
I think it hits at the hearts of most Indonesians. Almost everyone has been offered a credit card, and almost everyone has been telephoned or visited by a debt collector.
Very special one, because he's supposed to know.
The drama grew when Erzan Okta's family turned to celebrity lawyer Otto Cornelius Kaligas.
What's this? Suharto, owned by the president.
This is his
golf stick. Yes. Golf putter.
O.C. Kaligas worked for the former dictator, Suharto, when he was accused of corruption.
It works.
In fact, he's fond of brandishing all sorts of powerful connections.
Yeah, this is Obama, right?
You're in the Oval Office?
Yes, I know, yeah. Oval room.
O.C. Kaligas advised the family to sue Citibank for more than $300 million and ordered the exhumation of Okta's body. The government's pathologist and police issued conflicting autopsy reports. The first noted serious bruises, the second blamed Okta's death on a stroke.
Two different contradictory autopsy report.
of course, questionable for me. Why it is not done in a legal and proper manner?
You think there's a cover-up?
Yes, that's for certain, a cover-up.
The family's pathologist performed an autopsy beside the grave and confirmed their worst fears.
Dalam arti kata kita temukan memar akibat kerasan tubuh di seluruh tubuh banyak, dada, di tungkai, di paha.
The cause of Okta's death is still unresolved. But his widow, Essie, has become a lightning rod for concern about big banks and their handling of bad debt.
Memang mereka udah banyak ngalamin.
Still, this is 2016, right? Still they have heavy corrupted, right? Unbelievable.
Banyak orang yang ngalamin seperti itu, tapi yang diteror-teror yang seperti ada yang sempat stroke.
Okta's case throws the spotlight on Jakarta's underbelly, where banks and big business engage standover men to do their dirty work.
A part of an ex-criminal, a person who doesn't have any work, but at least can intimidate, can make brutality, against the debtor.
Thugs and the unemployed.
The unemployed, usually, yes. They come from a dark world of the society.
The debt collectors working for Citibank were questioned by the police and are now in custody. Citibank says they did nothing wrong, but at the same time it argues it's not responsible for their actions because they were contractors, not bank employees.
Citibank, karena dia meninggal di situ, dia datang ke situ dengan niat baik dan meninggal di situ, dan ternyata pada saat dia autopsi memang dia dianiaya di situ.
Okta's death triggered a wave of sanctions against Citibank. It's been forced to hire 1,400 in-house debt collectors after it was banned from hiring contractors for a year. It's also been banned from issuing new credit cards for 2 years and from opening new branches for a year.
Whether it's the darker alleys of the debt collectors or the Ferraris and Porsches of Melinda, it just shows how acceptable it is in this country to make money by any means, by somewhat questionable methods.
And as we've seen, the questionable methods go right to the top. It's not only the Miranda Gultom bribery affair that sullied Bank Indonesia, but a history of endemic vote buying and influence peddling. Central bank governors, their deputies and senior officials have been jailed for crimes including corruption, misappropriation of funds and bribing politicians to pass laws on the running of the bank.
The culture in the past, it's not only in parliamentary people, but almost across the board, that in Indonesia, they don't observe the rule. Authority means money. Authority means you have the authority to do whatever you want to do. And bribing is very, very common.
And it's taken its toll on Miranda Gultom. But she's determined to continue playing a role in the economic future of her country.
It's a very unpleasant time for me. It hurts my feeling, it hurts my...
Many cases like her, dealing business, some introduction, real estate, something else, she will get 10% of dealing business. So that's the reason. Maybe that's the reason she's rich. Maybe. Philippine, the Marcos' wife, I heard she so-called 10% ready. Any kind of dealing, 10%.
my children's and my husband's feeling, my family's feeling, but they all supported me, because they believe that I didn't do anything. I didn't give money, I didn't ask people to give money, I didn't promise anything. I really want this to be solved and be as transparent as possible.
The big credit rating agencies are just one step away from recommending investment in Indonesia. When that happens, billions more will flow into one of the most corrupt economies on earth.
Yeah, that's our problem, yeah. Corruption is a big problem in Indonesia.
Okay. This is another interesting, right? Video. How about this is the wrong one? Can I have one more and then next week we can get into the Indonesian history? Okay, this is very long. But this one is not long. 10 minutes? Australia's complex relationship with Indonesia. Yes, he is talking about Associate Professor Greg Fearley and former Australian ambassador to Indonesia, Bill Farmer, discussed the often complex relationship and measures required to strengthen it. This story is, like this is summarized. 外交問題。ビル・フレイマー。ビデオの話分かる人は、ジョコビオドは話が分からない。これね、麻薬を捕まったオーストラリア人が死刑になったんですよね。で、オーストラリアで釈放しろって言ったけど、釈放しないで死刑殺しちゃった。ね。オーストラリアに行こう。OK。バラストですね。バラスト。evident. Essentially. On the side. Rat back. いやね。あんまり使わないな。lame. Overlook. Nobby. 使わないな。Predispose. 違うな。Benign. これはしょっちゅう出てきます。Impending. これもしょっちゅう出ます。Go off the track. Sway. Inflammatory. Counterproductive. しょっちゅう出てきます。Conducive. これもしょっちゅう出てくる。Conducive. Notwithstanding. これもしょっちゅう使います。Ministerial. これもしょっちゅう出ます。Concomitant. そうかな。Concomitant. ちょっと待って、チェックしますね。Concomitant. 違うよね。Concomitant ね。G が多い。Concomitant. Yelling. Recall. Gratification. Certainty. Scrabble. これはみんな出てきますね。Consign はあんまり使わない。Away これもあんまり使わない。Chapeau これはフランス語。Doomsayer これはしょっちゅう出ます。Doomsayer なんていうのこれ。薬価を予言する人。Doomsayer これよく出ますね。Okay, let's have a look. This is about 10 minutes.
Hello, I'm Associate Professor Greg Feely, and it's my pleasure today to be joining conversation with Bill Farmer, who was Ambassador to Indonesia and also a very distinguished public servant in Australia, including Secretary of the Department of Immigration and Multicultural Affairs, but now retired, but still frequently visiting Indonesia. And Bill, your view of how the Australian-Indonesian relationship is going, I know that you have made a few public comments where you've expressed regret about some of the recent developments. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your views on the bilateral relationship in the last few years.
Look, I think we've come to one of the periodic low points in our relationship, and that's unfortunate because certainly over many years our governments have tried to build up what we've called ballast in the relationship, people-to-people contacts, business contacts between our security forces, our customs, our immigration, our fisheries people, all of the sorts of elements of a relationship which enable Australians and Indonesians to work together. And we have worked together really well and continue to do that, although that's not always evident from the public discourse. But I think that we've seen, perhaps over a 10-year period, a vast change in the way that our two countries have dealt with each other, a change away from Australia's dealing with the authoritarian regime of President Suharto, where essentially if President Suharto was on side, everything else fell into place. Now we have two messy, vigorous, robust democracies with...
It's a different meaning, not this one.
Anyone from the most intelligent to the lamest ratbag being able to say what they like, and that inevitably makes things much more complicated than it might have been 10 or 15 years ago. I think it's very unfortunate when we have the political leadership in both countries really looking at short-term political gains for domestic political reasons, as we've seen in both Australia and Indonesia over this last 18 months, in the context both of election campaigns, but also when dealing with particular issues. And I think it is unfortunate when some of the appeals that are made...
He's just talking about the issue means narcotic, drug trafficking.
To popular sentiment in each country really overlook the fact that whatever's said in Australia is going to be repeated in Indonesia. Whatever's said in Indonesia is going to be repeated in Australia. And raising the temperature unnecessarily seems to me very unfortunate.
How much would you put down the current... You mentioned that we're currently at a kind of one of the regular nadirs of the relationship. And how much would you put that down to the personalities of the people who are leading both countries or senior key ministers in the governments of both countries? And how much do you put this down to broader societal attitudes, for better or for worse? Both countries are democracies and politicians are very mindful of what the broader electorate says.
Very good question. I think that we can illustrate that in part by looking at the difference between President Yudhoyono and the current President of Indonesia, President Jokowi. Yudhoyono was really predisposed to looking at cooperation with Australia through a positive lens. He was ready to expand the range of things that we worked together on. With President Jokowi, I don't think we have that mindset. He certainly does not seem to be as interested in international issues as President Yudhoyono. So that's one way. I mean, that's a benign way, if you like. It's just a difference in personality and approach. But I think also that it is possible to examine this question of the role of leadership in a democracy when we're dealing with close neighbours, as we are between Australia and Indonesia. For example, the question of the impending execution and then the execution of two Australians.
He's just talking, then he's coming, focus point, execution. Right? It's 4 minutes already spent. But what is the issue? This is the issue. maybe Australian way. Hesitation.
In Indonesia earlier this year. I think that our political leadership began very well. They were doing exactly the right thing. They were making high-level approaches to ministers, to the president, reflecting very clearly deeply held views among the Australian community. And that, I think, was appropriate. I think we went off the tracks, though, when our government seemed to be scrambling around for additional things to say, additional arguments to put in an environment where it seemed pretty clear, to me anyway, that we'd had our say, we were not going to sway Indonesia, and that making some, I think, somewhat inflammatory statements was going to be quite counterproductive. So there's a balance that political leaders always have to look for in leading a democracy, but also in managing our diplomatic and foreign relations in ways that are conducive to Australian interests.
I was very interested. I've heard you say publicly, compare, I know it's a hypothetical, but compare how Australia, the very strong Australian response to the execution of the Bali II in Indonesia, compared to, for example, if an Australian was on death row and facing execution in one of the many American states that still has the death penalty, and whether Australia would say the kinds of things and take the kinds of retaliatory action that it did take in the Indonesia case. Would you be willing to perhaps talk about some of those views that you have on that?
Yeah. Well, it is obviously a hypothetical case, but it bears on a broader issue. Do we think about our relationship with the United States or with New Zealand in terms of a whole set of issues and problems? No, we don't. How do we think about our relationship with Indonesia? Too often, I think, we immediately do, and I'm guilty of this as anyone, we immediately go into the listing of the issues and problems. And there's a mindset there that I think is not helpful, and one that we should change for the future. But you know, if notwithstanding Australian representations in the hypothetical case of the execution of an Australian by an American state, if our representations had failed, would we impose a freeze on ministerial contacts with the United States? Would we withdraw our ambassador from the United States? It's a question I did just invite everyone to think about.
Yeah. Just coming back to this issue of public attitudes.
Okay, in the case of execution, in the case of America, its attitude is different. Actually, the Australian government asked ambassador back to Australia from Indonesia at this case. Okay, in the case of execution is planned in the States, their action will going to be different. They never asked ambassador back to Australia from the United States, he said. Okay?
And in particular to the boat people issue in Australia, how Australia has handled that. In Indonesia, there are very few people who are sympathetic to the arguments that Australia puts. But within Australia, I'm fairly certain that the view of the Abbott government is that this is one of their strong political pluses, that they have stopped the boats. And indeed, the Prime Minister says this repeatedly. So this seems to be a case where the electorate, or at least those parts of the electorate that are responsible for putting a government in, are strongly the view that we need to stop the boats. And so the government pursues that vigorously, even though Indonesians are often very irritated by the way in which we do this. So how is a government in a democratic system like Australia to respond to those pressures? Because the Prime Minister, senior ministers are on talkback radio, they're hearing regularly how strongly public sentiment is on this. And so what do we expect from our diplomats, from our leaders in this circumstance?
Yeah. Look, in that circumstance, with a very strong domestic political imperative, any diplomat understands the environment in which they're working. Their government is set on a course. I think that's important. I think it's also important, though, to remember that there are positives in the turnaround issue from the Indonesian point of view. Positives that they won't necessarily be very keen to point out. Stopping the pull factor means that Indonesia would not be suffering the sorts of arrivals into Indonesia and the concomitant social and other problems that it's faced over the last 10 years. Now, saying that simpliciter is not a winning argument with Indonesia, but having a discussion broadly based with a neighbour and a country with which we've cooperated over many years is, I think, something where you can actually have a discussion, you can introduce perspectives, you can agree to disagree even, and we've certainly done that on numbers of issues over the years. I'd much rather have the discussion on a continuing basis between governments than run it through the headlines where we're both essentially yelling past each other.
I've heard you be critical in public of the recall of the Australian ambassador. So this would seem a case in point where the public was almost demanding a very concrete retaliation by the Australian government to that. And if I've recalled correctly, you don't feel that was in fact a particularly helpful response by us. Could you talk a little bit about your views on this?
I think the Lowy opinion polls show that in fact a majority of Australians didn't approve of that measure. It's the first time we've withdrawn our ambassador from Indonesia, notwithstanding a whole history of very severe difficulties in our relationship with that country, including periods when our soldiers were shooting at each other, periods when Australian journalists were massacred by Indonesian soldiers in East Timor, periods of real political sensitivity. And so, no, I didn't agree with that. I think that the role of the ambassador is to work in that country on issues affecting Australia's bilateral interests. And I would say the same thing about the idea of putting a freeze onto ministerial contacts. I just don't think myself that the momentary gratification of saying, let's withdraw the ambassador, let's have a freeze, I don't think that is worth the period then of lack of contact and lack of certainty that you have. A period when you have to essentially scrabble around and say, well, what's the criterion for our resuming ministerial contacts? It's a question that's quite difficult to answer, and I'd much rather it hadn't been raised.
A final question. Do you have much optimism about the bilateral relationship over the next 5 or so years? We have Jokowi in office for another 4.5 years. The Abbott government is facing an election next year, but it's very unlikely that public dynamics that influence our governments are going to change a lot. So do you think that we will be consigned to having the kind of regular sources of tension that we have now?
Well, Greg, when I was ambassador, I was paid to be optimistic as well as realistic. Now I do it for nothing. And I essentially do think that if we can approach issues in the right way, bearing in mind the enormous array of cooperation, or ballast, you might say, in the relationship, we've got a foundation for working well together. I'd be saying, over this next few months, we should be resuming ministerial contacts. We should be looking at ways of negotiating a closer economic partnership agreement. We should be introducing more Australian business people to Indonesia. We should be sending our young Australian scholars to Indonesia under the new Colombo plan. We should be resuming the sorts of contacts that we have between all sorts of government agencies which have stood us in good stead over time. And to the extent that we can get the political discourse disciplined in a way that puts an appropriate chapeau over all of that activity, I think we'd be doing well. There's obviously a question mark about it. I'm not a doomsayer, and I hope that we, as two countries, can get it right.
Thank you very much, Bill Farmer, for giving up your time for us to talk about some of the relations in the bilateral, some of the issues in the bilateral relationship, and we look forward to perhaps getting your comments again in one of these ANU forums. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Greg.
Okay, Australian people, they have something, message for Indonesia for the execution of Australian 2 people, right? But still, they are trying to keep close contact with Indonesia. Okay? So this is today, we're going to switch into afternoon session, Africa. Okay? So Africa, we're going to just close down this one.